What the ruling will do, however, is increase political pressure not just on Israel, but on Israel's allies. And the US and the UK and Germany will find it much more difficult, I think, to provide the sort of support for Israel and the unequivocal support for Israel they've hitherto provided.
The International Court of Justice will rule today on whether to order that Israel has to halt its military operations in Gaza. It's part of a case that's being brought by South Africa alleging that Israel's committing genocide. Sam Fowles is a barrister specialising in international law and is a director of the Institute for Constitutional Research who joins us. Sam, thank you for joining us. Explain, what is this ruling about then today?
So today's ruling is called an interim ruling. It's not a final decision on whether Israel has committed genocide or not. We can't expect that for several years, likely. What this is about is whether Israel's actions fall within the realms of genocide and whether, as a result, the ICJ needs to order Israel to cease fire, effectively.
So how do you go about proving that?
Well, with great difficulty. And this is why a lot of people expressed some surprise that South Africa brought a genocide case. And because genocide is a rarity and almost unique in international law and in international politics, because it's not simply about your actions as a state, but it's about the intention behind your actions. So genocide is committing acts like killing or displacement on a mass scale, but with the intention of eliminating a racial or ethnic group. And that's why it's so difficult to prove, because it's difficult to prove that what Israel's actions or anyone else's actions are motivated by that specific aim to eliminate the Palestinians as such.
You know, this conflict, we speak to Israel frequently about representatives from the IDF about what they're trying to achieve, what their missions are, what their aims are. The way that this conflict has developed in terms of the fact that so many elements have been broadcast around the world, whether that's just by the world's media or what we're seeing on social media, how does that change sort of the evidence gathering and therefore the trial that will play out?
Well, there's never been a genocide case like this in previous high-profile cases, such as in Rwanda or in the Balkans. The perpetrators or alleged perpetrators did everything they could to hide the evidence and keep everything behind closed doors. In this case, it's totally different. Everything has been broadcast almost live, and which makes it South Africa's argument very, very different to previous arguments in the ICJ, because they're not just saying, well, we've done a lot of digging and we've found these documents that have been hidden. They were literally playing the statements, the televised statements of Israeli leaders in the court on the screens.
So what are Israel saying mounting as their defence?
Israel's defence really falls into two parts, and you had, on one hand, a very sort of technical and compelling argument delivered by actually a British lawyer acting on Israel's behalf, saying, number one, South Africa have gone about this all wrong. There's a procedural issue here. South Africa haven't gone through the requisite steps. They've just rushed into the court for show.
I think just to interrupt there, can you explain why it is that South Africa are pursuing this? Because that might be confusing.
Well, South Africa, and it goes back to South Africa's history, and because South Africa has been a victim of apartheid and very, very serious crimes against its own people and come through that, it sees itself as a champion of what it would call oppressed peoples, and it sees itself as needing to stand up for those. Interestingly, Israel, of course, also sees itself as a champion of oppressed peoples, and so this case is two nations, two states with very, very tragic histories, arguing over what is the right way to respond to those histories.
So what could happen today is that they have to halt military operations in Gaza. That's what the ruling will say. But actually, when it comes to enforcing any of that, they've got no power at all. That's
correct. And it's unlike in a domestic court where they can send bailiffs or police rounds if you don't comply with their orders. The ICJ doesn't have that. And Israel has already said, Benjamin Netanyahu has already said it's very unlikely to abide by a ruling. What the ruling will do, however, is increased political pressure, not just on Israel, but on Israel's allies. And the US and the UK and Germany will find it much more difficult, I think, to provide the sort of support for Israel and the unequivocal support for Israel they've hitherto provided if there is this interim injunction in place.
Yeah, that gets far more uncomfortable. Thank you so much, Sam. It's been fascinating. We'll see how it develops today and keep you across it here on Times Radio. Sam Fowles, barrister specialising in international law, on the ruling going to be made later on today from the International Court of Justice whether to order Israel to halt its military operations.